The morning was like any other. The sun peeked through the blinds, casting a warm glow on the kitchen table where Jason sat, sipping his coffee. His wife, Emma, was still asleep in their shared bed. As he scrolled through his phone, a notification from his bank popped up. The text was short, impersonal, and almost eerie. Your ATM card was used today. Transaction approved. 500. Balance available. 2,500. Jason froze, staring at the message. It wasn't just the amount or the fact that it was a standard notification. It was the ATM card. Emma's card. She had a joint account with him, and the last time he checked, their finances had been in good standing. But this was different. He hadn't been informed about any planned withdrawals, and the message seemed off, an ominous tone. Jason felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He quickly checked the time. It was still early, and Emma's absence from the kitchen felt strange. He stood up abruptly, his coffee cup forgotten on the table. His mind raced, the gears turning faster now. There were things he didn't know, things he couldn't explain. Was this a mistake? Or something else entirely? As he paced the living room, his thoughts darkened. Something about this didn't sit right, but what was it? Had he missed something? Had Emma been hiding something from him? Jason's curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to investigate. The more he thought about it, the more his gut told him something was wrong. His heart beat louder in his chest as he walked toward the study, determined to find answers. His fingers trembled as he reached for the computer keyboard. But what was he expecting to find? Another transaction? A trail of hidden secrets? It didn't matter. He needed answers. As the screen illuminated in front of him, he typed in Emma's name, prepared to dive deeper into the mystery. His eyes flicked over the screen. Nothing. Just an account overview. But then, one document caught his eye, a recent bank statement. His fingers hovered over the mouse, his pulse quickening. The statement was the clue he had been waiting for. It was all there. The withdrawals, the transfers, everything. And yet, none of it made sense. Why hadn't Emma told him? Why had she been so secretive? Jason's heart raced as a wave of dread washed over him. This was only the beginning. Something was unraveling, and he had no idea where it would lead. The shock of it all was still sinking in. The perfect life he thought they had was starting to fracture. Jason sat frozen in the study, staring at the screen in disbelief. His mind raced, trying to piece together what he had just uncovered. The statement on his computer seemed so foreign, so out of place, that he could barely comprehend what he was seeing. Emma's name, the frequent transfers to an account he didn't recognize, the strange amounts, all of it was foreign to him. She had always been meticulous with money. They shared everything, from bills to savings to every last cent that went into their joint account. So why was their money moving, without his knowledge, to someone or somewhere else? His thoughts spiraled as his gaze flicked to the bank statement on the screen, his mind working overtime to figure out the whys and hows. Was Emma hiding something? Had she been planning something for a long time? His stomach twisted. This couldn't be happening. His perfect life was starting to show cracks, ones he hadn't noticed before. A wave of disbelief washed over him. How could he have been so blind? What did this mean for their future? He reached for his phone, hoping maybe he had missed something in the details, some kind of explanation that would make it all clearer. But there was nothing. The silence in the room felt deafening. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jason's heart beat erratically, and his world seemed to tilt, leaving him uncertain of everything he thought he knew. Emma had always been the one person he could count on. But now, her secret bank account, her hidden actions, spoke volumes he wasn't sure he could decipher. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the rest of the statement. The more he looked, the more questions he had. And as his thoughts scattered, one simple, terrifying truth began to form. He was being kept in the dark, and he didn't know how deep the rabbit hole went. Jason's breath caught in his throat as the phone in his hand slipped from his grasp and landed softly on the desk. He had to confront Emma. There was no other choice. He needed answers, and he needed them now. But as the seconds stretched, the thought of confronting her filled him with a sinking dread. What would he say? How could he possibly explain the depth of his discovery without pushing her further away? His mind raced with scenarios, all of them ending in a confrontation that might break everything. He felt a sudden wave of nausea. What if this was the beginning of the end? What if she had already made up her mind? The questions piled up like bricks in his chest. Was their entire marriage a lie? Was she seeing someone else? The more Jason thought about it, the more distorted his version of reality seemed to become. His vision blurred, and he could hear the faint sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. But he couldn't ignore it. He had to face the truth, whatever it was. He needed to talk to her, right now. He stood up from the desk, the chair scraping against the floor, the sudden noise loud in the silence. He paused, staring at the door leading to their bedroom. Emma was still asleep, unaware of the storm brewing in the other room. Jason took a deep breath, steeling himself for the inevitable conversation. His hand hovered over the doorknob, his heart pounding in his chest. What if he was wrong? What if he was misinterpreting the entire situation? He had to know. Slowly, he turned the knob. Emma stirred in the bed, her body shifting beneath the blankets. Jason hesitated, unsure whether to wake her gently or confront her head-on. His stomach churned. Was he really prepared for this? He had so many questions, but no clear answers. What would happen when he asked her about the withdrawals? Would she deny everything, or would she break down and admit to something far worse? His mind reeled as he took a step forward. His shoes creaked against the wooden floor, the sound cutting through the otherwise silent room. Emma's eyes fluttered open, her expression initially confused before she blinked a few times, trying to focus on the figure standing by the door. "Jason?" Her voice was soft, hoarse from sleep, but it was enough to pull him from his thoughts. "What's going on?" Jason's throat tightened. He had to say something, anything, but no words came. Instead, he gestured toward the desk, where the bank statement sat waiting to be addressed. The silence between them stretched on, thick and suffocating. Emma sat up, her confusion deepening. "What's wrong?" she repeated, her voice tinged with worry. Jason took a deep breath, trying to find his words, but all that came out was a strained whisper. "We need to talk." Emma rubbed her eyes as she glanced at Jason. The uncertainty in the air was thick, and she could sense that something was off. "What's going on, Jason?" she asked again, her voice tinged with concern. Jason didn't respond immediately, his mind still reeling from the shocking discovery. His eyes flicked to the desk, then back to Emma. I found something," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma's brows furrowed, and she scooted to the edge of the bed. "What did you find?" she asked, now fully awake and on edge. Jason took another deep breath, his hands trembling. "It's about the bank statement. There are withdrawals I didn't know about." He paused, watching her closely for a reaction. "From your account," he added, almost as an afterthought. Emma's face immediately tightened, and Jason saw the shift in her demeanor. The calm, relaxed woman he had known for years was now replaced by someone who looked guilty, defensive, and distant. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she sighed deeply. "Jason, She trailed off, her words hanging in the air. It was clear that she had something to hide. The moment stretched out, and Jason's heart sank. This was not the conversation he had hoped for. This was just the beginning of something much darker. Jason spent the next few days consumed by the discovery. He couldn't shake the image of those bank statements. The weight of the unspoken words in Emma's eyes during their conversation lingered. She hadn't been as transparent as he had thought. Jason's mind raced in circles, his thoughts constantly returning to the transactions, where the money was going, and why Emma had never mentioned them. Was there a reason behind it, or was he simply jumping to conclusions? The days bled into one another, But Jason found himself obsessively rechecking the bank statements, tracing the transfers that seemed out of place. He had even started comparing dates, trying to make sense of a pattern, but everything seemed scattered. Emma's behaviors had started to change too. She became more withdrawn, less talkative, and her usual warmth seemed to be replaced by a coldness that unsettled Jason even more. But the strange part was the lack of confrontation. She wasn't defensive like before. She wasn't angry, just distant. This new version of Emma left Jason with more questions than answers. One night, after Emma went to bed, Jason decided to take things into his own hands. He needed to know where that money was going. The urge to dig deeper had become unbearable. Sitting at the computer, he pulled up the bank's detailed transaction history, scrolling through each and every entry with painstaking precision. There had to be a reason for this. He just needed to uncover it. His fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for any clues he could use. But this time he wasn't alone in the search. He could feel the presence of something, or someone, lurking in the corners of his mind, the truth, just beyond his reach, waiting for him to find it. The next morning, Jason couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation with Emma in his head. Had he missed something? She was acting strangely. Had she always been so distant? He remembered the times when they would lay in bed, talk for hours, and share their hopes and fears. But now, it felt like they were worlds apart. Jason knew something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint it. His instinct told him that the money wasn't the only secret Emma was hiding. After breakfast, he decided to approach her again, but this time with a different angle. He needed to be more subtle, more careful. He couldn't afford to push her too far. Jason casually asked her about the recent bank statement, trying to act as if he were concerned about their finances. "I noticed a few large transactions," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Emma's reaction was telling. Her face turned pale for a split second before she smiled and reassured him. "It's nothing, just some things I've been working on," she replied, but there was a nervousness in her voice that Jason couldn't ignore. The smile didn't reach her eyes. Jason's heart sank. He had heard enough. This wasn't just about the money. It was about something far more personal. The truth was starting to feel like a heavy weight in the room, and Jason could no longer avoid it. Later that evening, Jason's frustration reached a breaking point. The conversation from earlier haunted him. He could no longer ignore the coldness in Emma's voice or the way she had deflected his questions. He needed to confront her, but this time, there would be no avoiding the truth. His mind was racing with possibilities, trying to figure out what was really going on. What was Emma hiding? Why hadn't she been upfront with him? And where did this secrecy stem from? Jason decided to follow her the next day. He had seen the pattern. A few days ago, she had gone out in the afternoon, leaving him behind. He knew that something was happening outside of their shared life. He didn't know whether it was someone else, a hidden affair, or something else entirely. But Jason was determined to find out. The next afternoon, he sat quietly in his car, parked a few blocks away from their house, waiting for Emma to leave. His heart was pounding, and the sense of betrayal gnawed at his insides. When she finally stepped out of the house and headed towards her car, Jason followed, keeping his distance. He kept a tight grip on the wheel, his knuckles white as he drove slowly behind her. Every time Emma's car turned, he followed, his mind racing with questions. Where was she going? And why was she being so secretive? As the minutes passed, the tension in Jason's chest grew unbearable. He wasn't sure what he would find, but he knew that this moment would reveal something he had been denying for too long. Emma had secrets, and Jason was ready to uncover them. Jason followed Emma to a small nondescript building on the outskirts of town. The location didn't look like anything special, just an ordinary office complex. But when Emma parked and entered the building, Jason's stomach dropped. He had never seen this place before. He watched as she disappeared inside, and for a moment, he simply sat in the car, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The questions were multiplying, and his heart was pounding in his chest. Who was she meeting? Why had she gone to such lengths to hide it? Jason sat for several minutes, his mind racing. He knew that he couldn't just wait around forever. He had to know what was going on. He parked his car a little farther down the street, out of sight, and waited. His pulse raced as the minutes ticked by. He glanced at his watch, his mind a whirlwind of suspicions. Emma had been inside for over an hour. What was happening in there? Why had she been so secretive? Jason was on the verge of breaking down, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't lose control. He had to stay focused on finding answers, no matter what it took. An hour later, Emma returned to her car. Jason's heart skipped a beat as she emerged from the building, looking around quickly before sliding into the driver's seat. He waited until she pulled away, then followed her again, keeping his distance. But this time, he noticed something different. There was a subtle change in her behavior. She was driving slower, more cautiously, almost as if she suspected someone might be following her. Jason's pulse quickened as he realized the danger of what he was doing. He had crossed a line. His mind screamed at him to stop, to turn around and pretend this never happened. But he couldn't. He had come too far. He followed her all the way back home, heart racing with each mile. When Emma parked in the driveway, Jason waited a few moments before driving past their house and pulling into a nearby side street. The nagging feeling in his chest was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just about the money. There was something more, something that Emma was hiding, and Jason had to uncover it before it was too late. Jason couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his stomach any longer. He had followed Emma again that afternoon, but this time things were different. He had seen her enter that building once more, but this time he hadn't just watched her leave. As soon as she went inside, Jason gathered his courage and approached the entrance. He tried to keep a low profile, staying hidden behind the corner, but his heart was pounding in his chest. Was this what he was supposed to do? Spy on his wife? Thought sickened him, but he pushed it aside. He needed to know the truth. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to stop, but something inside told him that this was the moment everything would change. He took a deep breath and walked toward the building's glass door. As he stepped inside, the cold air hit him, and he immediately felt out of place. The office was sleek, with minimal decor, and the sterile, quiet atmosphere made Jason's skin crawl. He hesitated by the entrance, watching Emma through the glass partition. She was sitting at a desk across the room, speaking with someone. Jason couldn't make out the details, but he could see the way she smiled, the way her body language shifted. This wasn't just a casual conversation. It was intimate, and that's when the pieces started to fall into place. Who was she meeting? Was this someone she had been seeing behind his back? Jason's mind raced with the possibilities, each one more devastating than the last. His worst fears were starting to take shape, and he was unable to escape the sense of dread that enveloped him. Jason could barely breathe as he watched from the corner. The more he saw, the more his chest tightened. This was no ordinary meeting. There was an energy between Emma and the person sitting across from her that felt far too personal. The way she laughed at something the stranger said, the way her eyes sparkled, there was a warmth there that Jason hadn't seen in months. He felt the bile rise in his throat. How long had this been going on? Was she seeing someone else? His hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. He couldn't tear his eyes away, but every second felt like an eternity. The weight of the moment pressed down on him as he realized the truth. Emma was hiding something much bigger than just money. She had created a life without him, one that he wasn't a part of. Jason's heart shattered as he processed the fact that the woman he had loved for so long had moved on. She was living a secret life that he wasn't included in, and it cut deeper than any betrayal. The conversation in the room continued, but Jason could no longer focus on the words. His mind was reeling. Every rational thought had been drowned out by the intensity of the pain he felt. He didn't know how long he had been standing there, but eventually, Emma stood up, brushing her hair back, and walked toward the door. Jason's instinct was to run, to get away before she saw him, but his feet were frozen to the floor. This was the moment that would change everything. When Emma exited the building, Jason couldn't keep his distance any longer. He had seen enough. He needed to know everything, and if confronting Emma was the only way to get those answers, then so be it. His hands were shaking as he gripped the steering wheel, following her car back home. The journey was long, but Jason felt every second stretch into eternity. He had been blind for so long, trusting Emma without question, and now he was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered trust. As Emma's car turned into their driveway, Jason parked further down the street, waiting. His mind raced through every possible scenario, wondering how this would unfold. What would he say to her? How would she react? He didn't know if he was ready for the truth, but he couldn't keep living in the dark. Every minute he delayed made the anxiety grow. He couldn't stay away any longer. It was time. He would go inside, confront Emma, and face whatever awaited him. The door creaked open as he stepped into the house, the silence inside overwhelming. Emma was in the kitchen, her back turned to him as she prepared dinner. She didn't hear him enter, but the moment she did, she tensed. Jason stood there for a long moment, his gaze locked on her back, the weight of what he had discovered pressing heavily on him. He wasn't sure if he could do this, but his voice came out before he could stop it. "We need to talk." Emma turned slowly, her face pale. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason could see the fear in her eyes, the hesitation in her stance. It wasn't just the question. It was the way she asked it. She knew what was coming. She knew this moment had been building for days, weeks even. Jason felt the anger rise in his chest, the years of blind trust and love suddenly feeling like a betrayal. "I know what's going on," he said, his voice raw. Emma's eyes widened for a moment, then quickly looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to sound calm, but Jason could hear the slight quiver in her voice. He didn't care about her denials anymore. He had seen everything, and now he needed her to face it. "I know about the bank transactions. I know about the secret meetings. And I know there's someone else, Emma. Who are you seeing?" The question hung in the air, thick with accusation. For a long moment, Emma didn't answer. She just stared at the floor, her face flushed with shame. Jason's heart ached as the silence stretched on. He wanted answers, but he didn't know if he could handle the truth. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice quiet and broken. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. Jason could barely breathe as he waited for her to continue, but he already knew the answer. Emma's confession hit Jason like a freight train. She told him everything, how she had met someone else, how the relationship had started as something innocent but quickly spiraled into an affair. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. But Jason could hardly hear her anymore. The pain was overwhelming, suffocating. The woman he had trusted with his life had betrayed him in ways he hadn't even imagined. His body went numb as he processed her words, his mind unable to reconcile the person she had been with the person she had become. "How long?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "How long has this been going on?" Emma hesitated before answering, a look of guilt washing over her face. "Months," she whispered. Jason closed his eyes, his fists clenched so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He could feel his chest tighten, the anger and sadness swirling inside him. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the betrayal, the lies, the years of his life wasted in ignorance. Jason opened his eyes and stared at Emma, not knowing what to say, not knowing if he could ever forgive her. His heart was shattered, and the weight of it felt unbearable. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered, turning and walking out of the kitchen. His mind was reeling, but all he knew was that his life would never be the same again. The weight of Emma's confession pressed heavily on Jason. He had retreated to the living room, needing space to breathe, but the air felt suffocating. His thoughts swirled in a painful frenzy. Months of doubts, suspicions, and the uncomfortable nagging feeling he had pushed away came rushing to the surface. His world, which had once felt so solid and secure, now felt like it was crumbling beneath him. How could she? How could Emma, the woman he thought he knew inside and out, do this to him? Jason ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth. Each step felt like a betrayal, a move further away from the life he once knew. His mind couldn't quiet down, drowning in a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. How had things gotten this bad? Was he so blind to her needs that he failed to notice the cracks forming in their relationship? He had thought their marriage was rock solid. They had shared so much, trusted one another with their deepest fears and desires. But now, everything was tainted. He couldn't even look at Emma without the image of the man she had been meeting flashing in his mind. The truth felt like a knife twisting in his gut, and Jason found himself in a battle between rage and sorrow. Part of him wanted to shout, to scream at Emma, to let her know the pain she had caused. But the other part of him just wanted to curl up in a corner, to escape the unbearable hurt that had settled in his chest. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the soft sound of Emma's footsteps approaching, unsure if she should say anything more. But Jason couldn't face her. Not yet. He wasn't ready for the finality of it all. Emma stood at the threshold of the living room, unsure of how to bridge the distance between them. She had never felt so far from Jason, so alone in the house that once felt like their shared sanctuary. She had wanted to tell him everything, but how could she explain it? How could she justify the choices she had made? She hadn't meant for it to go this far. When the affair had started, it had been a moment of weakness, something that she had never expected to spiral out of control. But now, facing Jason, the weight of her actions crushed her, and all she wanted was for him to understand the emotional disconnect she had felt. But even as the words gathered in her throat, she realized it didn't matter anymore. There was no coming back from this. "Jason," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. She took a tentative step forward, but Jason didn't move. "Please look at me," she begged. But the silence that followed felt suffocating, the emotional gulf between them only widening. She had betrayed him, and in doing so, had lost not just his trust, but herself as well. Emma didn't know what she had been expecting when she confessed, but she certainly hadn't prepared for the coldness she saw in Jason's eyes. The man she had loved so deeply was now a stranger, distant and unreachable. Jason didn't turn to face Emma, but he could feel the weight of her gaze on his back, each second stretching into eternity. "I don't know who you are anymore," he finally said, his voice breaking slightly. The words were out before he could stop them, but they felt like a truth he had been holding back for too long. His heart was in his throat, the pain unbearable as it choked him from the inside. "I trusted you, Emma," he continued, his voice steadier now, but the pain was still there, raw and cutting. "You were my everything." Emma's breath hitched, and for a moment Jason thought she might say something to explain it all, to give him the reason he so desperately needed to hear. But nothing came. The silence that followed her failure to respond cut deeper than any words could. "What happened to us?" Jason asked, his voice softer now, full of despair. "I thought we were happy." The finality in his voice made Emma's heart ache. There was no coming back from this, no fixing it. She had broken something that could never be repaired. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling, but it felt hollow, like an echo of the pain that had already consumed them both. Jason turned slowly, his face contorted with a mixture of hurt and rage. "Sorry doesn't fix this," he said, his words harsh and bitter. "Sorry won't bring back the trust you've shattered." He took a step back, his eyes never leaving hers. The love they had once shared was gone, and all that remained was this gaping hole of betrayal. Emma couldn't bear to look at Jason anymore. She had caused him too much pain, and every word she spoke only seemed to deepen the wound. The regret gnawed at her insides, and she knew she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The silence stretched on as they both stood there, two people whose lives had been irrevocably changed. Jason didn't know how to move forward, didn't know if he could even look at Emma the same way. The person he had shared so many intimate moments with, the woman he had once called his partner, was now someone who felt like a stranger. How could he go back to loving her after everything? How could he trust her again after what she had done? The thought was suffocating. "I can't do this, Emma," Jason finally said, his voice steady but laced with finality. "I can't keep living a lie. I can't keep pretending everything is okay." Emma closed her eyes, unable to meet his gaze, knowing he was right. This wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about something deeper, something that had been lost. She had failed him in the worst way possible. "I understand," she whispered. The finality in her voice matched the emptiness in the room, and Jason's heart shattered all over again. He had tried to save them, tried to hold on, but some things couldn't be repaired. Not anymore. The finality of it all hung in the air like an unspoken truth. Emma remained sitting on the couch, her body trembling with the weight of everything she had done. Jason stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room as if he were trying to find something, anything that could make this feel real. It didn't. Nothing would. The room felt like a prison now, filled with memories that only caused him more pain. Jason took a deep breath, his hand resting on the doorframe, but he didn't know what to do next. Could he leave? Could he walk away from everything they had built together? The decision was too much to bear, and yet he knew it had to be made. He couldn't stay here anymore. Not like this. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice firm but cracked. "I need to get away from all of this." Emma's eyes shot up, the shock and despair clear on her face. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words never came. Jason was already moving toward the door, his heart pounding with every step. The door clicked shut behind him with a finality that sent a chill through the house. Emma collapsed onto the couch, her body racked with sobs. Jason was gone. And so was everything they once had. The days following Jason's departure were a blur. The house felt empty, cold, like a shell of its former self. Emma walked through the rooms, each step echoing in the silence that now enveloped her life. She had expected Jason to leave, but the reality of his absence was something she wasn't prepared for. The house felt too quiet, the stillness too much to bear. The walls, which had once witnessed laughter, arguments, and intimate moments, now seemed oppressive. Every memory she had once cherished now felt like a reminder of the love she had lost, the trust she had broken. She had tried to reach out to Jason countless times, but each call, each message went unanswered. Her mind swirled with the consequences of her actions, replaying every decision that led to this point. She had no one to blame but herself. Emma sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the empty space next to her. The sheets were cold, untouched. Her tears had dried up days ago, but the heaviness in her chest remained. She had lost the one person who meant everything to her. What could she possibly say to make it right? Was it even possible? It felt like she had ruined everything, shattered it beyond repair. Her guilt was suffocating, and for the first time in years, Emma truly understood the consequences of her actions. She had betrayed Jason in the worst way, and now she had to face the fallout alone. The reality of her choices settled in like a stone, weighing her down, and she didn't know how to move forward. Days turned into weeks, and still, Jason did not respond to Emma's attempts to reconnect. She knew that he needed time, space, things that she couldn't give him. She had taken so much from him, and now, she had to face the aftermath of her betrayal alone. Every day felt like an eternity, each hour filled with longing and regret. Emma spent her days trying to pick up the broken pieces of her life, but it felt like trying to rebuild a shattered vase with nothing but her bare hands. Nothing seemed to fit together anymore. Work didn't help. Friends had stopped reaching out, unsure of how to support her after everything that had happened. Emma could feel the distance between her and the world growing. She had pushed everyone away, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. It wasn't just Jason she had lost. It was herself. She had allowed her desires to override her sense of loyalty and love, and in doing so, she had abandoned everything that mattered. She couldn't escape the gnawing sense of self-loathing that followed her everywhere. But even in the midst of this crushing realization, Emma couldn't stop thinking about Jason. She missed him in ways she couldn't even begin to explain. The hole he had left in her heart was growing deeper, and the guilt she carried seemed to haunt her every step. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit in this sorrow forever. She needed to make amends, if only she could find the strength to face him again. Emma finally decided to take the first step toward redemption, even if it meant facing the consequences of her actions. She had spent too much time hiding from the truth, but now she was ready to face it head on. She knew that there was no way to undo the past, no way to erase the hurt she had caused. But she needed Jason to understand that she had learned, that she regretted everything. Emma found herself standing in front of the door to Jason's apartment, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't seen him in weeks, and the thought of facing him made her stomach churn. What could she say to make him believe that she was truly sorry? What words could ever heal the pain she had caused? She raised her hand to knock, but hesitated. She had no idea what to expect. Jason might not even want to see her, let alone hear her out. But she had to try. After what felt like an eternity, she knocked. The sound echoed down the hallway, and for a moment Emma thought she might turn around and run. But before she could, the door swung open, revealing Jason standing there, his expression unreadable. His eyes softened for a brief moment, but the silence that followed was thick with tension. Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Jason, I need to talk to you," she whispered, her voice shaky. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what might come next, but she had come this far. She had to face him. "Please," she added, her eyes searching his, hoping for some kind of response. Jason stood there for a moment, just looking at Emma. The last time he had seen her, everything had fallen apart. The woman who had once been his partner, the one he trusted above all others, had broken him. He hadn't wanted to see her like this, broken, vulnerable, but there she was. He felt a mixture of anger and sadness, but more than anything, he felt exhausted. He had spent so many nights replaying their memories, asking himself where it had all gone wrong. Was it his fault? Had he missed the signs? It didn't matter now. What mattered was the woman standing before him, asking for forgiveness. Jason's lips parted, but no words came out. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to say, or if he even could. Could he forgive her? Could he look past the pain she had caused? He wanted to believe in her, to believe that people could change, but something inside of him kept pulling him back. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Emma," he finally said, his voice quiet but firm. The truth of it stung. "You hurt me in a way I didn't think was possible." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She just stood there, taking in every word Jason said. She knew that she had to take responsibility for her actions, no matter how much it hurt. "But I want to try," Jason added, his voice softer now. "I want to try to find a way forward, but it's going to take time." Emma's heart swelled with relief, but she knew it wasn't over yet. They were only beginning the long road to healing, and she wasn't sure where it would lead. In the days that followed, Jason and Emma began to slowly rebuild what had been broken. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with moments of doubt and moments of clarity. They both understood that the path to healing was not going to be easy or quick. Emma spent hours reflecting on her mistakes, working through the guilt and shame that had followed her every step. She realized that she couldn't change the past, but she could control her actions from here on out. For Jason, the process was more complicated. He wasn't sure if he could ever fully trust Emma again, but he wanted to try. They began to talk more openly, facing the pain head on and allowing themselves to grieve. Slowly, they started to rediscover the connection that had once bound them together. It was fragile, like a thread weaving through the wreckage of their past. But it was something. It was a start. Jason had learned to forgive, not for Emma's sake, but for his own. He had to release the anger that had consumed him, or it would eat away at him forever. And Emma in turn had to prove through her actions that she could be trusted again. It wasn't easy, and they both knew there would be setbacks along the way. But for the first time in a long time, there was a glimmer of hope. They had both faced the darkest parts of themselves, and now they were ready to see if they could emerge from the ashes of their shattered past. Weeks passed, and Jason's emotional turmoil slowly began to shift from the pain of betrayal to a more focused anger. The long talks with Emma had allowed him to process some of his hurt, but the truth lingered like an open wound. He had tried to move on, to let the past stay behind, but the bitterness in his heart refused to fade. The wounds were too deep, and the betrayal too fresh. Emma had hurt him in a way he hadn't thought possible, and every attempt at reconciliation felt like a constant reminder of that pain. Jason knew he needed to confront her again, this time, not for closure, but to demand answers, to bring the dark feelings into the light and lay them to rest. He needed to understand why she had done it, why she had chosen to destroy what they had built together. He needed to know if she had truly changed, or if her actions were a reflection of her true self, someone he didn't know at all. He found himself standing outside her door once again, the same door he had walked through so many times before. But this time he was different. The anger and disappointment simmering beneath the surface had hardened, and the confrontation he had been avoiding for so long now felt unavoidable. He knocked firmly, and when Emma opened the door, her eyes were filled with hesitation, a glimpse of guilt still evident in her expression. "We need to talk," Jason said, his voice cold, steady, and unyielding. This time there would be no soft words, no easy forgiveness. The truth would come out, no matter the cost. Emma stepped aside, allowing Jason to enter, but her eyes never left him. "What's this about, Jason?" she asked, her voice trembling. She had expected this moment, but it didn't make it any easier. She had tried so hard to show him she had changed, but the weight of the past was impossible to shake off. "You've been distant," Jason began, his voice now tinged with frustration. "You've apologized, but there's still something between us that I can't let go of." He took a step closer to her, the space between them now charged with a mixture of anger and sadness. Emma's face fell, and for a brief moment, Jason could see the vulnerability that had always been beneath her defenses. "You lied to me, Emma," Jason continued, the hurt creeping back into his voice. "You weren't just dishonest, you betrayed my trust, my love. And I still don't understand why." His words hung in the air like a weight too heavy to ignore. He had tried to move past it, tried to let the wounds heal, but there was no healing without answers. "Tell me why," he demanded. "Why did you do it?" Emma's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in a long while, Jason saw the remorse in her expression. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She had spent so many nights rehearsing this moment, but nothing could prepare her for the look in Jason's eyes, the raw hurt that still lingered, unhealed. Emma took a deep breath and finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't have an excuse," she began, her eyes not meeting his. "I can't explain why I did it. There's no reason that makes sense, and I hate myself for it. But it wasn't about you, Jason. It wasn't because I didn't love you." Jason's eyes narrowed as he processed her words. "Then what was it about?" he demanded. "I don't understand. We were happy. Or at least I thought we were." Emma's throat tightened as she struggled to find the right words. "It was my own insecurities, my need for something more," she said, her voice shaking. "I wasn't enough for myself, and I thought that if I could fill that emptiness, I'd be whole again." She finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with regret. "But I was wrong. I destroyed everything, and I'll never be able to take that back." The room was silent for a long moment as Jason absorbed her words. The explanation didn't make it any easier, but it was the truth, her truth. And as painful as it was to hear, Jason couldn't deny that it was the honesty he had been searching for. He didn't know if he could forgive her, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of understanding. This wasn't about love. It was about something deeper, something Emma had never dealt with. The realization hit him hard, and for a moment he felt the weight of his own anger soften. It was a step forward, but it wasn't enough. Jason exhaled slowly, the tension in his body beginning to ease. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Emma," he confessed, his voice breaking slightly. The weight of his words settled in the room, and for the first time in a long time, both of them truly understood the depth of what they had lost. "I want to forgive you," he continued, looking at her with a mixture of longing and pain. "But I don't know how. Every time I think about what you did, it feels like I'm back at the beginning. Hurt. Betrayed." Emma closed her eyes, the tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Jason," she whispered, her voice full of despair. "I don't deserve it." Jason's gaze softened slightly as he reached out, but pulled his hand back, unsure of how much contact they could truly share. "I don't know what to do with this anymore," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can live in a relationship where trust has been shattered." Emma nodded silently, her body trembling with the weight of her regret. "I understand," she said softly. "But I need you to know that I've been trying to change. Not for you, but for myself. I can't undo the past, but I'm working on being better." The silence between them deepened, and Jason turned away slightly, staring out the window as if looking for some clarity. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. Forgiveness wasn't a guarantee, but it was something he had to wrestle with. Whether he could find peace was another question entirely. The conversation, although painful, brought a small sense of closure, but the healing had only just begun. Jason knew that he couldn't move on without finding a way to let go of the past, but he didn't know how long it would take. It wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about rebuilding a sense of self, of trust, that had been broken so completely. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure if he ever would. Emma too had her own battle to fight. She had to rebuild herself, confront her own fears and insecurities, and figure out how to move forward, whether or not Jason could forgive her. The future was uncertain, and neither of them knew what it held. But for the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope. It wasn't a guarantee that they would get back together, or that they would find happiness in the same way they once had, but they had both faced the truth. That at least was a start. As Jason left her apartment that evening, he felt a strange sense of peace. He wasn't healed, but he wasn't as broken as he had been. The weight of the past still hung over him, but he had taken the first step toward healing, toward letting go of the pain. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, but it was the only way forward. The days following Jason's final conversation with Emma were filled with uncertainty. He had walked away from the apartment, unsure of what the future held, but there was a sense of closure in the air. It wasn't the closure he had hoped for. There were no neat answers, no promises that everything would be fixed. But somehow he felt lighter. The weight of his anger, the bitterness that had been eating him alive, was no longer as heavy. He had given himself the space to grieve, to heal, and now it was time to move forward. But even in the silence of the night, Jason couldn't escape the memory of the life he had once shared with Emma. He found himself walking through the streets of the city, unsure of where he was going, but knowing that he couldn't stay stagnant. The world was moving forward. And so must he. As he walked, he passed familiar spots, places where he and Emma had shared quiet moments, laughing over coffee or sitting on park benches. Each place now felt alien, a part of the past that no longer belonged to him. The nostalgia hit him hard, but there was no time for regret anymore. He had made his choice, and he had to live with it. The horizon stretched ahead of him, just as uncertain as the path behind. But he had one thing he had lacked for so long: a sense of self. He was moving on, even if he wasn't sure what the next step looked like. The past would always remain a part of him, but it didn't have to define him anymore. He took a deep breath, inhaling the cool night air, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to think about the future without fear. Weeks passed, and while the pain of the past lingered, Jason began to rediscover the parts of himself that had been buried. He returned to old hobbies, things he had put aside while wrapped up in the turmoil of his relationship with Emma. He started to spend more time with friends, those he had neglected in the wake of the betrayal, and with each conversation, he realized that life could still be fulfilling, even without the person he thought he couldn't live without. The road to healing wasn't a straight line. There were days when he felt lost, uncertain of his place in the world. But there were also moments of clarity, moments when he could feel the fog lifting and the path becoming a little clearer. He began to work on projects he had once been passionate about, finding satisfaction in small accomplishments that had nothing to do with Emma or the past. Jason wasn't the same person he had been before the betrayal, and, in a strange way, that gave him hope. He had been broken, but he wasn't beyond repair. The scars would always be there, but they didn't have to define him. One evening, as he sat in his favorite cafe, Jason realized that he had finally reached a place of peace. He wasn't angry anymore, nor was he filled with regret. He had learned to accept the past, to acknowledge the hurt, and to move forward. He had forgiven, not for Emma's sake, but for his own. And that, he realized, was the most important step he could have taken. Emma, too, had begun the difficult journey of rebuilding her life. After the confrontation, she had withdrawn for a while, giving herself the time to reflect on everything she had lost. The guilt still weighed heavily on her, but she had also realized that she couldn't keep punishing herself. She had made mistakes, but those mistakes didn't have to define her. Slowly, she reconnected with her friends, people she had distanced herself from during the affair. They didn't judge her, they were there for her, helping her navigate the painful process of finding herself again. She started seeing a therapist, working through her insecurities, trying to understand why she had made the choices she had. It wasn't easy. Each session peeled back layers of pain, uncovering fears and wounds she had buried for years. But Emma was determined. She had lost herself in her relationship with Jason, in trying to be someone she thought she needed to be, and now, she was learning how to be herself again. The journey wasn't quick, and there were days when she felt overwhelmed. But there were also moments when she saw glimpses of the person she used to be, the person who could love without fear, without insecurity. She knew it would take time, but for the first time in a long while, she had hope. The future was still uncertain, but she was ready to take it on, one step at a time. Emma had learned that healing didn't come from waiting for someone else's forgiveness. It came from forgiving herself first. The phone call came unexpectedly. Jason had been sitting in his apartment, sipping his coffee, when his phone buzzed. It was Emma. He had avoided contacting her after the confrontation, unsure of where things stood between them. But when he saw her name on the screen, a part of him felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He had spent so much time trying to heal, to move forward, and now the past was coming knocking at his door again. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should let it go to voicemail. But then he pressed the button, his heart beating a little faster. "Jason." Emma's voice came through the phone, soft and steady, but tinged with uncertainty. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. For everything. I don't know if you can forgive me, but I needed to say it. You've been so kind, and I know I don't deserve it." Jason paused, taking in her words. He had forgiven her in his own way, not for her sake, but for his own peace. But hearing her say the words again, hearing the sincerity in her voice, stirred something inside of him. "Emma," Jason began, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I've already forgiven you. It's taken time, but I've let go of the anger." A quiet pause filled the space between them, the weight of the words settling in. "I don't know what the future holds for either of us," he continued, "but I wish you peace, Emma, I really do." Time passed, and though they never rekindled their relationship, Jason and Emma each found their own paths. They would occasionally cross paths, a shared glance or a quiet smile that acknowledged the history between them, but that was all. Their time together had been significant, but it was over now. And though they had both suffered, they had also grown. Jason had rebuilt his life, carving out a new sense of purpose and learning to live with the scars that would always be a part of him. Emma too found strength in her journey, reclaiming her independence and rebuilding her sense of self. They had both come a long way, but they were no longer the people they had been. Jason smiled to himself one evening as he walked through the park, the sun setting behind him, casting a golden light over the path. He had learned to love again, not just others, but himself. And as he took in the beauty around him, he knew that life, though uncertain, was still full of possibilities. The future was waiting, and he was ready to face it with an open heart.